Okay. How does the audio sound once Vela gets in here? Okay. Not too loud, no distortion or anything. Awesome. What about the relative volume between the music and my voice? Good, too loud, too soft? This is the first time with the new audio settings for the voice and the mic. You don't hear the music, you don't hear my voice, so you don't hear any problems. Ruh-roh. Okay. Hmm. How about now? Hmm. This is weird. How about now? Okay. How about now? Hey, Panda. Is the music still too loud? All right. It'll boost me up just a bit. All right. We'll try that then. See if that works better. Thank you very much for helping with that. I really appreciate it. Hey, Bobo. Welcome to the stream. I'll have to play with the background music and audio more later after the stream. Hey, good point. I do need to restart the poll. There we go. All right. Welcome, everyone. It's time to return to the story. Hope everyone's having a good day and a good week. I think that would be an achievement even for you, Random. I'm not sure I believe you could pull that off. Panda, Boba, how are you doing today? No. There's no exclamation mark in front of the name. So, when you want to vote, it's exclamation mark, vote, and then the first name. Unless, of course, it's like Dr. Bauerstein. So there I had to use last name. Or Hastings, who's not given another name that I've seen. All right, so where were we? They had the inquest and decided to vote in favor of charges of murder, but against person or persons unknown. And the two inspectors from Scotland Yard were there. We suspect they have a warrant for the arrest of Alfred Inglethorpe on hand, but Poirot persuaded them not to present it and called everyone to a meeting where he offered Alfred the chance to give his alibi. Alfred, of course, was either too afraid of scandal, too embarrassed, or too arrogant to give himself the alibi for murder. So Poirot was forced to reveal that Alfred was seen in the company of Miss Reeks, the gypsy, off and on, and in the time in question. And I believe it said he had like 5 or 6 witnesses to the effect, which meant that Alfred could not have poisoned Mrs. Inglethorpe. I'm sorry you're not feeling well. That sucks. Oh, and let's see. Apparently, Hastings, Poirot, and Inspector Jopp are going to be very important characters going forward in the Poirot novels that reoccur frequently. So, but we are on chapter 8, which is Fresh Suspicions. We also are waiting to find out how Alfred Inglethorpe was seen purchasing strychnine. Poirot believes it was somebody in disguise taking advantage of the rather unique appearance and easily counterfeited appearance of Alfred Inglethorpe in order to make him appear to have purchased the poison. But without further ado, let's begin. Chapter 8, Fresh Suspicions. There was a moment's stupefied silence. Jopp, who was the least surprised of any of us, was the first to speak. "My word," he cried. "You're the goods, and no mistake, Mr. Poirot. These witnesses of yours are all right, I suppose." "Voila! I have prepared a list of them, names and addresses. You must see them, of course, but you will find it all right." "I'm sure of that." Jopp lowered his voice. "I'm much obliged to you. A pretty mare's nest arresting him would have been." He turned to Inglethorpe. "But if you'll excuse me, sir, Why couldn't you say all this at the inquest? I will tell you why, interrupted Perrault. There was a certain rumor, a most malicious and utterly untrue one, interrupted Alfred Inglethorpe in an agitated voice. And Mr. Inglethorpe was anxious to have no scandal revived just at present. Am I right? Quite right, Inglethorpe nodded. With my poor Emily not yet buried, can you wonder I was anxious that no more lying rumors should be started? Between you and me, sir, remarked Jopp, I'd sooner have any amount of rumors than be arrested for murder. And I venture to think your poor lady would have felt the same. And if it hadn't been for Mr. Perrault here, arrested you would have been, as sure as eggs is eggs. That's foolish, no doubt, murmured Inglethorpe. But you do not know, Inspector, how I have been persecuted and maligned. And he shot a baleful glance at Evelyn Howard. Now, sir, said Jopp, turning briskly to John, I should like to see the lady's bedroom, please, and after that I'll have a little chat with the servants. Don't you bother about anything. Mr. Perrault here will show me the way. As they all went out of the room, Perrault turned and made me a sign to follow him upstairs. There, he caught me by the arm and drew me aside. Quick, go to the other wing. Stand there, just this side of the baize door. Do not move till I come. Then turning rapidly, he rejoined the two detectives. I followed his instructions, taking up my position by the baize door, and wondering what on earth lay behind the request. Why was I to stand in this particular spot on guard? I looked thoughtfully down the corridor in front of me. An idea struck me. With the exception of Cynthia Murdoch's, everyone's room was in this left wing. Had that anything to do with it? Was I to report who came or went? I stood faithfully at my post. The minutes passed. Nobody came. Nothing happened. It must have been quite 20 minutes before Perrault rejoined me. You have not stirred? No. I've stuck here like a rock. Nothing's happened. Ah! Was he pleased or disappointed? You've seen nothing at all? No. But you probably heard something. A big bump, eh, mon ami? No. Is it possible? Ah, but I am vexed with myself. I am not usually clumsy. I made but a slight gesture, I know Perrault's gestures, with the left hand, and over went the table by the bed. He looked so childishly vexed and crestfallen that I hastened to console him. Never mind, old chap. What does it matter? Your triumph downstairs excited you. I can tell you that was a surprise to us all. There must be more to this affair of Inglethorpe's with Mrs. Reeks than we thought, to make him hold his tongue so persistently. What are you going to do now? Where are the Scotland Yard fellows? Gone down to interview the servants. I showed them all our exhibits. I am disappointed in Jopp. He has no method. Hullo, I said, looking out the window. Here's Dr. Bauerstein. I believe you're right about that man, Perrault. I don't like him. Hey, Meg, glad you came. Hello, I said. I'm sorry, he is clever, observed Perrault meditatively. Meg threw me off my train of thought. Oh, clever as the devil. I must say I was overjoyed to see him in the plight he was in on Tuesday. You never saw such a spectacle. And I described the doctor's adventure. He looked like a regular scarecrow, plastered with mud from head to foot. You saw him then? Yes, of course. He didn't want to come in. It was just after dinner, but Mr. Inglethorpe insisted. Don't think it's frozen. I'll try replaying it. All right, I set it to a new pattern. That should get it moving again, I think. It's homing the table. It'll take a minute. And then the ball should start to move. I don't believe it's the image that's frozen. I think it was the table itself. I hope I haven't worn it out. I would be having words with the company if it was already worn out. All right. Shall I take a moment to troubleshoot the table or just keep going with. There's definitely sand in it. Or should I just keep going with the story, do you think? The app says it's still homing the table, so. Hey, Meg, thank you for the host. All right. Technical difficulties. I will give us a brief pause. Okay. Let me see if it's working now. Okay, focus is a little off. Let me adjust the camera a bit. Yep, Meg, you came in, you broke everything, and you killed the focus. You broke all my gear. You gave me your grainy. I love it. It's awful, but I love it. Okay. Let's see what we can do with this. All right, we seem to be moving okay. All right, lights working again. All right, what do we think? Are we good? Suppose I should probably slow it down a little bit. It does move a bit faster on the outer sections, Dakotan. And welcome to the stream, by the way. Glad to have you here. Okay. I slowed it down a little bit just to be extra cautious. I'm definitely going to have to do some research on the company's website and see what that was all about. Because that was unpleasant, especially when it started yelling at me. But crisis averted. Yay. Should we go back to the I hope it's not Sonic like that ever, ever, ever again. That was awful. It was so loud. It was actually vibrating my desk. All right, so back to the story. Hastings had just been telling Perot about seeing the doctor covered in mud head to foot, and when it was. And Perot reacted with a shock. What? Perot caught me violently by the shoulders. Was Dr. Bauerstein here on Tuesday evening? Here? And you never told me? Why did you not tell me? Why? Why? He appeared to be in an absolute frenzy. I'm sorry it came through, Vela. It was frighteningly loud. I tried to mute as quick as I could. My dear Perot, I expostulated. I never thought it would interest you. I didn't know it was of any importance. Importance? It is of the first importance. So Dr. Bauerstein was here on Tuesday night, the night of the murder? Hastings, do you not see? That alters everything. Everything. I had never seen him so upset. Loosening his hold of me, he mechanically straightened a pair of candlesticks, still murmuring to himself, Yes, that alters everything. Everything. Suddenly, he seemed to come to a decision. Allons, he said. We must act at once. Where is Mr. Cavendish? John was in the smoking room. Perot went straight to him. Mr. Cavendish, I have some important business in Tadminster. A new clue. May I take your motor? Why, of course. Do you mean at once? If you please. John is sus because he has a motor car? Okay. John rang the bell and ordered round the car. In another 10 minutes, we were racing down the park and along the high road to Tadminster. Now, Perrault, I remarked rather resignedly, perhaps you will tell me what this is all about. Well, mon ami, a good deal you can guess for yourself. Of course you realize that, now Mr. Inglethorpe is out of it, the whole position is greatly changed. We are face to face with an entirely new problem. We know now that there is one person who did not buy the poison. We have cleared away the manufactured clues. Now for the real ones. I have ascertained that anyone in the house, with the exception of Mrs. Cavendish, who was playing tennis with you, could have personated Mr. Inglethorpe on Monday evening. In the same way, we have his statement that he put the coffee down in the hall. No one took much notice of that at the inquest, but now it has a very different significance. We must find out who did take that coffee to Mrs. Inglethorpe eventually, or who passed through the hall whilst it was standing there. From your account, there are only two people whom we can positively say did not go near the coffee. Mrs. Cavendish and Mademoiselle Cynthia. Yes, that is so. I felt an inexpressible lightening of the heart. Mary Cavendish could certainly not rest under suspicion. In clearing Alfred Inglethorpe, continued Perrault, I have been obliged to show my hand sooner than I intended. As long as I might be thought to be pursuing him, the criminal would be off his guard. Now he will be doubly careful. Yes, doubly careful. He turned to me abruptly. Tell me, Hastings, you yourself, have you no suspicions of anybody? I hesitated. To tell the truth, an idea, wild and extravagant in itself, had once or twice that morning flashed through my brain. I had rejected it as absurd. Nevertheless, it persisted. You couldn't call it a suspicion, I murmured. It's so utterly foolish. Come now, urged Perrault encouragingly. Do not fear. Speak your mind. You should always pay attention to your instincts. Well, then, I blurted out. It's absurd, but I suspect Miss Howard of not telling all she knows. Miss Howard? Yes, you'll laugh at me. Not at all. Why should I? I can't help feeling, I continued blunderingly, that we've rather left her out of the possible suspects, simply on the strength of her having been away from the place. But after all, she was only 15 miles away. A car would do it in half an hour. Can we say positively that she was away from Styles on the night of the murder? Yes, my friend, said Perrault unexpectedly. We can. One of my first actions was to ring up the hospital where she was working. Well, I learnt that Miss Howard had been on afternoon duty on Tuesday, and that, a convoy coming in unexpectedly, she had kindly offered to remain on night duty, which offer was gratefully accepted. That disposes of that. Oh, I said, rather nonplussed. Really, I continued, it's her extraordinary vehemence against Inglethorpe that started me off suspecting her. I can't help feeling she'd do anything against him, and I had an idea she might know something about the destroying of the will. She might have burnt the new one, mistaking it for the earlier one in his favor. She is so terribly bitter against him. You consider her vehemence unnatural? Yes. She is so very violent. I wondered, really, whether she is quite sane on that point. Perrault shook his head energetically. No, you are on a wrong tack there. There is nothing weak-minded or degenerate about Miss Howard. She is an excellent specimen of well-balanced English beef and brawn. She is sanity itself. Yet her hatred of Inglethorpe seems almost a mania. My idea was, a very ridiculous one no doubt, that she had intended to poison him, and that, in some way, Mrs. Inglethorpe got hold of it by mistake. But I don't at all see how it could have been done. The whole thing is absurd and ridiculous to the last degree. Still, you are right in one thing. It is always wise to suspect everybody until you can prove logically and to your own satisfaction that they are innocent. Now, what reasons are there against Miss Howard's having deliberately poisoned Mrs. Inglethorpe? Why, she was devoted to her, I exclaimed. Cha, cha, cried Poirot irritably. You argue like a child. If Miss Howard were capable of poisoning the old lady, she would be quite equally capable of simulating devotion. No, we must look elsewhere. You are perfectly correct in your assumption that her vehemence against Alfred Inglethorpe is too violent to be natural. But you are quite wrong in the deduction you draw from it. I have drawn my own deductions, which I believe to be correct, but I will not speak of them at present. He paused a minute, then went on. Now, to my way of thinking, there is one insuperable objection to Miss Howard's being the murderess. And that is, that in no possible way could Mrs. Inglethorpe's death benefit Miss Howard. Now, there is no murder without a motive. I reflected. Could not Mrs. Inglethorpe have made a will in her favor? Poirot shook his head. But you yourself suggested that possibility to Mr. Wells. Poirot smiled. That was for a reason. I did not want to mention the name of the person who was actually in my mind. Miss Howard occupied very much the same position, so I used her name instead. Still, Mrs. Inglethorpe might have done so. Why, that will, made on the afternoon of her death, may— But Poirot's shake of the head was so energetic that I stopped. No, my friend. I have certain little ideas of my own about that will. But I can tell you this much. It was not in Miss Howard's favor. I accepted his assurance, though I did not really see how he could be so positive about the matter. Well, I said with a sigh, we will acquit Miss Howard then. It is partly your fault that I ever came to suspect her. It was what you said about her evidence at the inquest that set me off. Poirot looked puzzled. What did I say about her evidence at the inquest? Don't you remember? When I cited her and John Cavendish as being above suspicion? Oh, yes. He seemed a little confused, but recovered himself. Well, I mean that as a motive, but it also implies a lack of sanity, Panda. And he's saying that Evelyn Howard is the soul of sanity. So, yeah. I don't think he's saying you can't. I mean, maybe you're a touch cray-cray? I don't know. You're here hanging with me, so. By the way, Hastings, there is something I want you to do for me. Certainly, what is it? Next time you happen to be alone with Lawrence Cavendish, I want you to say this to him. I have a message for you from Poirot. He says, find the extra coffee cup and you can rest in peace. Is that nothing more, nothing less? Find the extra coffee cup and you can rest in peace? Is that right? I asked, much mystified. Excellent. But what does it mean? Ah, that I will leave you to find out. You have access to the facts. Just say that to him and see what he says. Very well, but it's all extremely mysterious. We were running into Tadminster now, and Poirot directed the car to the analytical chemist. Poirot hopped down briskly and went inside. In a few minutes, he was back again. There, he said, that is all my business. What were you doing there? I asked, in lively curiosity. I left something to be analyzed. Yes, but what? The sample of cocoa I took from the saucepan in the bedroom. But that has already been tested, I cried, stupefied. Dr. Bauerstein had it tested, and you yourself laughed at the possibility of there being strychnine in it. I know Dr. Bauerstein had it tested, replied Poirot quietly. Well then? Well, I have a fancy for having it analyzed again, that is all. and not another word on the subject could I drag out of him. This proceeding of Perrault's, in respect to the cocoa, puzzled me intensely. I could see neither rhyme nor reason in it. However, my confidence in him, which at one time had rather waned, was fully restored since his belief in Alfred Inglethorpe's innocence had been so triumphantly vindicated. Oops, Velen ninja'd you random. The funeral of Mrs. Inglethorpe took place the following day, and on Monday, as I came down to a late breakfast, John drew me aside and informed me that Mr. Inglethorpe was leaving that morning to take up his quarters at the Stylites Arms until he should have completed his plans. And really, it's a great relief to think he's going, Hastings, continued my honest friend. It was bad enough before, when he thought he'd done it, but I'm hanged if it isn't worse now, when we all feel guilty for having been so down on the fellow. The fact is, we've treated him abominably. Of course, things did look black against him. I don't see how anyone could blame us for jumping to the conclusions we did. Still, there it is. We were in the wrong, and now there's a beastly feeling that one ought to make amends, which is difficult when one doesn't like the fellow a bit better than one did before. The whole thing's damned awkward, and I'm thankful he's had the tact to take himself off. It's a good thing Styles wasn't the maters to leave to him. Couldn't bear to think of the fellow lording it here. He's welcome to her money. You'll be able to keep the place up all right? I asked. Oh, yes. There are the death duties, of course, but half my father's money goes with the place, and Lawrence will stay with us for the present, so there is his share as well. We shall be pinched at first, of course, because, as I once told you, I am in a bit of a hole financially myself. Still, the Johnnies will wait now. In the general relief at Inglethorpe's approaching departure, we had the most genial breakfast we had experienced since the tragedy. Cynthia, whose young spirits were naturally buoyant, was looking quite her pretty self again, and we all, with the exception of Lawrence, who seemed unalterably gloomy and nervous, were quietly cheerful at the opening of a new and hopeful future. The papers, of course, had been full of the tragedy. Glaring headlines, sandwiched biographies of every member of the household, subtle innuendos, the usual familiar tag about the police having a clue. Nothing was spared us. It was a slack time. The war was momentarily inactive, and the newspapers seized with avidity on this crime in fashionable life. The mysterious affair at Styles was the topic of the moment. Naturally, it was very annoying for the Cavendishes. The house was constantly besieged by reporters, who were consistently denied admission, but who continued to haunt the village and the grounds, where they lay in wait with cameras for any unwary members of the household. We all lived in a blast of publicity. The Scotland Yard men came and went, examining, questioning, lynx-eyed and reserved of tongue. Towards what end they were working we did not know. Had they any clue, or would the whole thing remain in the category of undiscovered crimes? After breakfast, Dorcas came up to me rather mysteriously and asked if she might have a few words with me. Certainly. What is it, Dorcas? Well, it's just this, sir. You'll be seeing the Belgian gentleman today, perhaps. I nodded. Well, sir, you know how he asked me so particular if the mistress or anyone else had a green dress? Yes. You have found one? My interest was aroused. No, not that, sir. But since then I've remembered what the young gentleman, John and Lawrence were still the young gentlemen, to Dorcas, call the dressing-up box. It's up in the front attic, sir. A great chest full of old clothes and fancy dresses and what-not. And it came to me sudden that there might be a green dress among them. So if you'd tell the Belgian gentleman— I will tell him, Dorcas, I promised. Thank you very much, sir. A very nice gentleman he is, sir, and quite a different class from them two detectives from London what goes prying about and asking questions. I don't hold with foreigners as a rule, but from what the newspapers say, I make out as how these brave Belgies isn't the ordinary run of foreigners, and certainly he's a most polite-spoken gentleman. Kind of feel like Dorcas might have a bit of a crush on good old Perrault. Dear old Dorcas. As she stood there, with her honest face upturned to mine, I thought what a fine specimen she was of the old-fashioned servant that is so fast dying out. She totally is. I thought I might as well go down to the village at once and look up Perrault, but I met him halfway, coming up to the house, and at once gave him Dorcas's message. Ah, the brave Dorcas. We will look at the chest, but no matter. We will examine it all the same. We entered the house by one of the windows. There was no one in the hall, and we went straight up to the attic. Sure enough, there was the chest, a fine old piece, all studded with brass nails, and full to overflowing with every imaginable type of garment. Perrault bundled everything out on the floor with scant ceremony. There were one or two green fabrics of varying shades, but Perrault shook his head over them all. He seemed somewhat apathetic in the search, as though he expected no great results from it. Suddenly, he gave an exclamation. "What is it? Look!" The chest was nearly empty, and there, reposing right at the bottom, was a magnificent black beard. "Oh ho!" said Perrault. "Oh ho!" He turned it over in his hands, examining it closely. "New," he remarked. "Yes, quite new." After a moment's hesitation, he replaced it in the chest, heaped all the other things on top of it as before, and made his way briskly downstairs. He went straight to the pantry, where we found Dorcas busily polishing her silver. Perrault wished her good morning with Gallic politeness and went on. "We have been looking through that chest, Dorcas. I am much obliged to you for mentioning it. There is indeed a fine collection there. Are they often used, may I ask?" "Well, sir, not very often nowadays, though from time to time we do have what the young gentlemen call a dress-up night. And very funny it is sometimes, sir. Mr. Lawrence, he's wonderful, most comic. I shall never forget the night he came down as the Tsar of Persia. I think that's what he called it. A sort of Eastern king it was. He had the big paper knife in his hand, and, 'Mind, Dorcas,' he says, 'you'll have to be very respectful. This is my specially sharpened scimitar, and it's off with your head if I'm at all displeased with you.' Miss Cynthia, she was what they call an Apache, or some such name. A Frenchified sort of cutthroat, I take it to be. A real sight she looked. You'd never have believed a pretty young lady like that could have made herself into such a ruffian. Nobody would ever have known her." "These evenings must have been great fun," said Perrault genially. "I suppose Mr. Lawrence wore that fine black beard in the chest upstairs when he was the Shah of Persia." "He did have a beard, sir," replied Dorcas, smiling, "and well I know it, for he borrowed 2 skeins of my black wool to make it with, and I'm sure it looked wonderfully natural at a distance. I didn't know as there was a beard up there at all. It must have been got quite lately, I think. There was a red wig, I know, but nothing else in the way of hair. Burnt corks they use mostly, though 'tis messy getting it off again. Miss Cynthia was a... Yeah, I'm not saying that. And oh, the trouble she had." "So Dorcas knows nothing about that black beard," said Perrault thoughtfully, as we walked out into the hall again. "Do you think it is the one?" I whispered eagerly. Perrault nodded. "I do. You notice it had been trimmed." "No. Yes, it was cut exactly the shape of Mr. Inglethorpe's, and I found 1 or 2 snipped hairs. Hastings, this affair is very deep." "Who put it in the chest, I wonder?" "Someone with a good deal of intelligence," remarked Perrault dryly. "You realize that he chose the one place in the house to hide it where its presence would not be remarked. Yes, he is intelligent, but we must be more intelligent. We must be so intelligent that he does not suspect us of being intelligent at all." I acquiesced. "There, mon ami, you will be of great assistance to me." All right, so is it just me, or did he just call Hastings a dummy? Kind of feel like he just totally dissed Hastings. I was pleased with the compliment. There had been times when I hardly thought that Perrault appreciated me at my true worth. Oh yeah, totally dissed him. Yes, he continued, staring at me thoughtfully. You will be invaluable. This was naturally gratifying, but Perrault's next words were not so welcome. I must have an ally in the house, he observed reflectively. You have me, I protested. True, but you are not sufficient. I was hurt and showed it. Perrault hurried to explain himself. You do not quite take my meaning. You are known to be working with me. I want somebody who is not associated with us in any way. Oh, I see. How about John? No, I think not. The dear fellow isn't perhaps very bright, I said thoughtfully. Here comes Miss Howard, said Perrault suddenly. She is the very person, but I am in her black book since I cleared Mr. Inglethorpe. Still, we can but try. With a nod that was barely civil, Miss Howard assented to Perrault's request for a few minutes' conversation. We went into the little morning room, and Perrault closed the door. Well, Monsieur Perrault, said Howard impatiently, what is it? Out with it. I'm busy. Do you remember, mademoiselle, that I once asked you to help me? Yes, I do, the lady nodded, and I told you I'd help you with pleasure to hang Alfred Inglethorpe. Ah, Perrault studied her seriously. Miss Howard, I will ask you one question. I beg of you to reply to it truthfully. Never tell lies, replied Miss Howard. It is this. Do you still believe that Mrs. Inglethorpe was poisoned by her husband? What do you mean? She asked sharply. You needn't think your pretty explanations influence me in the slightest. I'll admit that it wasn't he who bought the strychnine at the chemist shop. What of that? I dare say he soaked flypaper, as I told you in the beginning. That is arsenic, not strychnine, said Perrault mildly. What does that matter? Arsenic would put poor Emily out of the way just as well as strychnine. If I'm convinced he did it, it doesn't matter a jot to me how he did it. Exactly. If you are convinced he did it, said Perrault quietly. I will put my question in another form. Did you ever, in your heart of hearts, believe that Mrs. Inglethorpe was poisoned by her husband? Good heavens, cried Miss Howard. Haven't I always told you the man is a villain? Haven't I always told you he would murder her in her bed? Haven't I always hated him like poison? Exactly, said Perrault. That bears out my little idea entirely. What little idea? Miss Howard, do you remember a conversation that took place on the day of my friend's arrival here? You repeated it to me, and there's a sentence of yours that has impressed me very much. Do you remember affirming that if a crime had been committed, and anyone you loved had been murdered, you felt certain that you would know by instinct who the criminal was, even if you were quite unable to prove it? Yes, I remember saying that. I believe it, too. I suppose you think it nonsense. Not at all. And yet you will pay no attention to my instinct against Alfred Inglethorpe. No, said Perrault curtly, because your instinct is not against Mr. Inglethorpe. What? No, you wish to believe he committed the crime. You believe him capable of committing it. But your instinct tells you he did not commit it. It tells you more. Shall I go on? She was staring at him, fascinated, and made a slight affirmative movement to the hand. Shall I tell you why you have been so vehement against Mr. Inglethorpe? It is because you have been trying to believe what you wish to believe. It is because you are trying to drown and stifle your instinct, which tells you another name. No, 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 cried Miss Howard, wildly, flinging up her hands. Don't say it. Oh, don't say it. It isn't true. It can't be true. I don't know what put such a wild, such dreadful idea into my head. I am right, am I not? Asked Perrault. Yes, yes, you must be a wizard to have guessed it. But it can't be so. It's too monstrous, too impossible. It must be Alfred Inglethorpe. Perrault shook his head gravely. Don't ask me about it, continued Miss Howard, because I shan't tell you. I won't admit it, even to myself. I must be mad to think of such a thing. Perrault nodded, as if satisfied. I will ask you nothing. It is enough for me to have thought that it is as I thought. And I too have an instinct. We are working together towards a common end. Don't ask me to help you, because I won't. I won't lift a finger to, she faltered. You will help me in spite of yourself. I ask you nothing, but you will be my ally. You will not be able to help yourself. You will do the only thing that I want of you. And that is, you will watch. Evelyn Howard bowed her head. Yes, I can't help doing that. I'm always watching, always hoping I shall be proved wrong. If we are wrong, well and good, said Perrault. No one will be more pleased than I shall. But if we are right, Miss Howard, on whose side are you then? I don't know. Come now. It could be hushed up. There must be no hushing up. But Emily herself, she broke off. Miss Howard, said Perrault gravely, this is unworthy of you. Suddenly she took her face from her hands. Yes, she said quietly. That was not Evelyn Howard who spoke. She flung her head up proudly. This is Evelyn Howard, and she is on the side of justice. Let the cost be what it may. And with these words, she walked firmly out of the room. There, said Perrault, looking after her, goes a very valuable ally. That woman, Hastings, has got brains as well as a heart. I did not reply. Instinct is a marvelous thing, mused Perrault. It can neither be explained nor ignored. You and Miss Howard seem to know what you're talking about, I observed coolly. Perhaps you don't realize that I am still in the dark. Really? Is that so, mon ami? Yes. Enlighten me, will you? Perrault studied me attentively for a moment or two. Then, to my intense surprise, he shook his head decidedly. No, my friend. Oh, look here, why not? 2 is enough for a secret. Well, I think it is very unfair to keep back facts from me. I am not keeping back facts. Every fact that I know is in your possession. You can draw your own deductions from them. This time, it is a question of ideas. Still, it would be interesting to know. Perrault looked at me very earnestly and again shook his head. You see, he said sadly, you have no instincts. It was intelligence you were requiring just now, I pointed out. The two often go together, said Perrault enigmatically. The remark seemed so utterly irrelevant that I did not even take the trouble to answer it, but I decided that if I made any interesting and important discoveries, as no doubt I should, I would keep them to myself and surprise Perrault with the ultimate result. There are times when it is one's duty to assert oneself. Oh yeah, totally dissing Hastings and calling him an idiot. All right, let's take a short intermission and see if the music will work on this one. If you haven't had a chance, you should vote in the poll. We've got one vote in right now for Mr. John Cavendish. Also, if you are listening and you haven't followed yet, please scroll down, click that purple follow button. It's much appreciated. We've only got about 15 more follows to go to get to that affiliate status, and then we'll be able to do some cool integrations with Discord and Prime Video. I can do like watch parties with you guys and stuff like that. So that'll be really awesome. Let's do an intermission. Say, get back to the story in about 5 minutes. It should give everybody a little bit of time. There we go. And let's see if we can't get that music going. Media source. was a bit loud. How's that for volume on it? I should refill my tea. Got the Edgar Allan Poe cup this time. It's all lines from his various writings. Let's see if I can find a cool one. Ah, this one I like. I've been thinking about reading The Mask of the Red Death. And darkness and decay, and the Red Death held illimitable dominion over all. This is another good one. I became insane with long intervals of horrible sanity. What do you think? Would you guys like to hear some Poe? Maybe on Friday? Okay, let's do some Poe on Friday. Oh, anybody got any theories on the murderer? Who do you think is sus? Who would you throw out the airlock? Who's the imposter? You think the cat did it? So, my kid, she's into biotech. She likes like biology and animals and technology and that kind of thing. And I've told her that she owes me a promise, that she's got to make one guarantee to me, that no matter what she does, she will never, ever give cats opposable thumbs. I told her if she does that, she's doomed our species. I don't know if any of you have ever watched Love, Death, and Robots, but there's a short video in there where they are wandering the ruins of civilization, and as it turned out, it was brought about by giving cats opposable thumbs. Music ended already. Oops. Well, what do you guys think of the music, by the way? I think they already sell those, Panda, in certain stores. Just saying. But I am neither naughty nor old, thank you very much. I may be grumpy on occasion, but I've got my tea and I've got all of you, and that helps. All right. Well, let's get back into it. Oh, and thank you very much. I will definitely concede grumpy and stubborn. But, like I said, mug of tea, teapot, good books, you guys. It helps with the grumpiness. It was suggested to me that maybe I might reduce the length of story time a little bit and do some community gaming toward the end of the stream to fill out the end of the 2 hours. Would any of you guys be into that? Do some, I don't know, Minecraft or Among Us or something else. I used to build some really cool stuff in Minecraft. I actually taught a class based in Minecraft in the past. I had, I think it was 13 students, and we built the forum and marketplace and a few other things for the city of Pompeii. And at the end of the class, because it was just a short 2-week kind of extracurricular course, I gave them all buckets of lava, and we reenacted Mount Vesuvius erupting and destroyed everything. I had shown a couple of the older ones how to use command blocks to program flaming rocks falling down from the sky and breaking everything. It was a lot of fun. But they learned culture and history and architecture and math and all that, and they just thought they were playing Minecraft. I tricked them. I tricked them into learning. All right. Well, back to the story, and I shall definitely consider adding a community gaming thing to the end. The Discord should also be ready by Friday, so you'll all be able to join the Discord, and we can kind of work on our community and getting people together and talking. You guys can give me a little bit of feedback, hopefully, on what works, what doesn't, what you like. And we can hang out and talk while we do the community gaming. Oh, that pattern's cool. I like it. All right. What has it got in its pockets, my precious? Now that I could read sometime, but it would have to be in like a subscriber reading session in the Discord, because I can't read books that are not public domain on Twitch Live. But there are exceptions for copyrighted works if you are in the equivalent of like a coffee shop or bookstore or a Discord channel or something like that. It's not treated the same way under the law from what I've researched. So we could do more modern books there as like a perk for subscribers and that kind of thing. So just a thought. All right, chapter 9, Dr. Bauerstein, and maybe Hastings will figure out that Perot is not impressed with his intelligence. I had no opportunity. Actually, I called the channel Cozy Chair, that I figured I'd do that in. But, I mean, coffee and tea shop, I could do that. I had no opportunity as yet of passing on Perot's message to Lawrence. But now, as I strolled out on the lawn, still nursing a grudge against my friend's high-handedness, I saw Lawrence on the croquet lawn, aimlessly knocking a couple of very ancient balls about with a still more ancient mallet. It struck me that it would be a good opportunity to deliver my message. Otherwise, Perot himself might relieve me of it. It was true that I did not quite gather its purport, but I flattered myself that by Lawrence's reply, and perhaps a little skillful cross-examination on my part, I should soon perceive its significance. Accordingly, I accosted him. "I have been looking for you," I remarked untruthfully. "Have you?" "Yes. The truth is, I've got a message for you. From Perot." "Yes?" "He told me to wait until I was alone with you," I said, dropping my voice significantly, and watching him intently out of the corner of my eye. I have always been rather good at what is called, I believe, creating an atmosphere. Or, being sketchy. Well, there was no change of expression in the dark, melancholic face. Had he any idea of what I was about to say? "This is the message," I dropped my voice still lower. "Find the extra coffee cup, and you can rest in peace." What on earth does he mean? Lawrence stared at me in quite unaffected astonishment. "Don't you know?" "Not in the least. Do you?" I was compelled to shake my head. "What extra coffee cup?" "I don't know. He'd better ask Dorcas or one of the maids if he wants to know about coffee cups. It's their business, not mine. I don't know anything about the coffee cups, except that we've got some that are never used, which are a perfect dream. Old Worcester. You're not a connoisseur, are you, Hastings?" I shook my head. "You miss a lot. A really perfect bit of old china. It's pure delight to handle it, or even to look at it." "Well, what am I to tell Perot?" "Tell him I don't know what he's talking about. It's double Dutch to me." "All right." I was moving off toward the house again when he suddenly called me back. "I say, what was the end of that message? Say it over again, will you?" "Find the extra coffee cup, and you can rest in peace." "Are you sure you don't know what it means?" I asked him earnestly. He shook his head. "No," he said musingly. "I don't. I wish I did." The boom of the gong sounded from the house, and we went in together. Perot had been asked by John to remain to lunch, and was already seated at the table. By tacit consent, all mention of the tragedy was barred. We conversed on the war and other outside topics, but after the cheese and biscuits had been handed round, and Dorcas had left the room, Perot suddenly leant forward to Mrs. Cavendish. "Pardon me, madam, for recalling unpleasant memories, but I have a little idea." Perot's little ideas were becoming a perfect byword, "and would like to ask one or two questions." "Of me?" "Certainly." "You are too amiable, madam. What I want to ask is this. The door leading into Mrs. Inglethorpe's room from that of Mademoiselle Cynthia, it was bolted, you say?" "Certainly it was bolted," replied Mary Cavendish, rather surprised. "I said so at the inquest." "Bolted?" "Yes." She looked perplexed. "I mean," explained Perot, "you are sure it was bolted and not merely locked?" "Oh, I see what you mean. No, I don't know. I said bolted, meaning that it was fastened, and I could not open it. But I believe all the doors were found bolted on the inside." "Still, as far as you are concerned, the door might equally well have been locked?" "Oh, yes." "You yourself did not happen to notice, madam, when you entered Mrs. Inglethorpe's room, whether that door was bolted or not?" I believe it was." "But you did not see it?" "No, I never looked." "But I did," interrupted Lawrence suddenly. "I happened to notice that it was bolted." "Ah, well, that settles it," and Perot looked crestfallen. I could not help rejoicing that, for once, one of his little ideas had come to naught. After lunch, Perot begged me to accompany him home. I consented rather stiffly. "You are annoyed, is it not so?" he asked anxiously, as we walked through the park. "Not at all," I said coldly. "That is well. That lifts a great load from my mind." This was not quite what I had intended. I had hoped he would have observed the stiffness of my manner. Still, the fervor of his words went toward the appeasing of my just displeasure. I thawed. "I gave Lawrence your message," I said. "And what did he say?" He was entirely puzzled. "Yes, I'm quite sure he had no idea of what you meant." I had expected Perot to be disappointed, But to my surprise, he replied that was as he had thought, and that he was very glad. My pride forbade me to ask any questions. Perrault switched off on another tack. Mademoiselle Cynthia was not at lunch today. How was that? She is at the hospital again. She resumed work today. Ah, she is an industrious little demoiselle, and pretty, too. She is like pictures I have seen in Italy. I would rather like to see that dispensary of hers. Do you think she would show it to me? I'm sure she would be delighted. It's an interesting little place. Does she go there every day? She has all Wednesdays off and comes back to lunch on Saturdays. Those are her only times off. I will remember. Women are doing great work nowadays, and Mademoiselle Cynthia is clever. Oh, yes, she has brains, that little one. Yes, I believe she has passed quite a stiff exam. Without doubt. After all, it is very responsible work. I suppose they have very strong poisons there. Yes, she showed them to us. They are kept locked up in a little cupboard. I believe they have to be very careful. They always take out the key before leaving the room. Indeed. It is near the window, this cupboard? No. Right on the other side of the room. Why? Perrault shrugged his shoulders. I wondered, that is all. Will you come in? We had reached the cottage. No, I think I'll be getting back. I shall go round the long way through the woods. The woods round Styles were very beautiful. After the walk across the open park, it was pleasant to saunter lazily through the cool glades. There was hardly a breath of wind. The very chirp of the birds was faint and subdued. I strolled on a little way, and finally flung myself down at the foot of a grand old beech tree. My thoughts of mankind were kindly and charitable. I even forgave Perrault for his absurd secrecy. In fact, I was at peace with the world. Then I yawned. I thought about the crime, and it struck me as being very unreal and far off. I yawned again. Probably, I thought, it really never happened. Of course, it was all a bad dream. The truth of the matter was that it was Lawrence who had murdered Alfred Inglethorpe with a croquet mallet. But it was absurd of John to make such a fuss about it, and then to go shouting, "I'll tell you I won't have it." I woke up with a start. At once I realized that I was in a very awkward predicament, for, about 12 feet away from me, John and Mary Cavendish were standing facing each other, and they were evidently quarreling, and quite as evidently they were unaware of my vicinity, for before I could move or speak, John repeated the words which had aroused me from my dream. "I tell you, Mary, I won't have it." Mary's voice came, cool and liquid. "Have you any right to criticize my actions? It'll be the talk of the village. My mother was only buried on Saturday, and here you are gadding about with the fellow." "Oh," she shrugged her shoulders. "It is only village gossip that you mind." "But it isn't. I've had enough of the fellow hanging about. He's a Polish Jew anyway." A tinge of Jewish blood is not a bad thing. It leavens the, she looked at him, solid stupidity of the ordinary Englishman. Fire in her eyes, ice in her voice. I did not wonder that the blood rose to John's face in a crimson tide. "Mary!" "Well?" Her tone did not change. The pleading died out of his voice. "Am I to understand that you will continue to see Bauerstein against my express wishes? If I choose? You defy me? No, but I deny your right to criticize my actions. Have you no friends of whom I should disapprove?" John fell back a pace. The color ebbed slowly from his face. What do you mean?" he said in an unsteady voice. "You see," said Mary quietly. "You do see, don't you, that you have no right to dictate to me as to the choice of my friends?" John glanced at her pleadingly, a stricken look on his face. "No right? Have I no right, Mary?" he said unsteadily. He stretched out his hands. "Mary!" For a moment I thought she wavered. A softer expression came over her face. Then suddenly she turned almost fiercely away. "None!" She was walking away when John sprang after her and caught her by the arm. "Mary," his voice was very quiet now, Are Are you in love with this fellow Bauerstein? She hesitated, and suddenly there swept across her face a strange expression, old as the hills, yet with something eternally young about it. She might some Egyptian sphinx have smiled, or so might some Egyptian sphinx have smiled. She freed herself quietly from his arm and spoke over her shoulder. Perhaps, she said, and then swiftly passed out of the little glade, leaving John standing there as though he had been turned to stone. Rather ostentatiously, I stepped forward, crackling some dead branches with my feet as I did so. John turned. Luckily, he took it for granted that I had only just come upon the scene. Hello, Hastings. Have you seen the little fellow safely back to his cottage? Quaint little chap. Is he any good, though, really? He was considered one of the finest detectives of his day. Oh, well, I suppose there must be something in it, then. What a rotten world it is, though. You find it so? I asked. Good Lord, yes. There's this terrible business to start with. Scotland Yard men in and out of the house like a jack-in-the-box. Never know where they won't turn up next. Screaming headlines in every paper in the country. Damn all journalists, I say. Do you know there was a whole crowd staring in at the lodge gates this morning? Sort of Madame Tussauds Chamber of Horrors business that can be seen for nothing. Pretty thick, isn't it? Cheer up, John, I said soothingly. It can't last forever. Can't it, though? It can last long enough for us to never be able to hold up our heads again. No, you're getting morbid on the subject. Enough to make a man morbid to be stalked by beastly journalists and stared at by gaping, moon-faced idiots wherever he goes. But there's worse than that. What? John lowered his voice. Have you ever thought, Hastings? It's a nightmare to me. Who did it? I can't help feeling sometimes it must have been an accident. Because who could have done it? Now Inglethorpe's out of the way, there's no one else. No one, I mean, except one of us. Yes, indeed, that was nightmare enough for any man. One of us? Yes, surely it must be so, unless... A new idea suggested itself to my mind. Rapidly I considered it. The light increased. Poirot's mysterious doings, his hints, they all fitted in. Fool that I was not to have thought of this possibility before, and what a relief for us all. No, John, I said. It isn't one of us. How could it be? I know, but still, who else is there? Can't you guess? No. I looked cautiously round and lowered my voice. Dr. Bauerstein, I whispered. Impossible. Not at all. But what earthly interest could he have in my mother's death? That I don't see, I confessed. But I'll tell you this. Poirot thinks so. Poirot? Does he? How do you know? I told him of Poirot's intense excitement on hearing that Dr. Bauerstein had been at Styles on the fatal night, and added, he said twice, that alters everything. And I've been thinking. You know, Inglethorpe said he had put down the coffee in the hall. Well, it was just then that Bauerstein arrived. Isn't it possible that, as Inglethorpe brought him through the hall, the doctor dropped something into the coffee in passing? Said John. It would have been very risky. Yes, but it was possible. And then, how could he know it was her coffee? No, old fellow, I don't think that will wash. But I had remembered something else. You're quite right. That wasn't how it was done. Listen. And I then told him of the cocoa sample which Poirot had taken to be analyzed. John interrupted just as I had done. But look here. Bauerstein had had it analyzed already. Yes, that's the point. I didn't see it either until now. Don't you understand? Bauerstein had it analyzed. That's just it. If Bauerstein's the murderer, nothing could be simpler than for him to substitute some ordinary cocoa for his sample and send that to be tested. And of course they would find no strychnine. And no one would dream of suspecting Bauerstein or thinking of taking another sample, except Poirot, I added with belated recognition. Yes, but what about the bitter taste that cocoa won't disguise? Well, we've only his word for that, and there are other possibilities. He's admittedly one of the world's greatest toxicologists. One of the world's greatest what? Say it again. He knows more about poisons than almost anybody, I explained. Well, my idea is that perhaps he's found some way of making strychnine tasteless. Or it may not have been strychnine at all, but some obscure drug no one has ever heard of, which produces much the same symptoms. Yes, that might be, said John. But look here, how could he have got at the cocoa? That wasn't downstairs. No, it wasn't, I admitted reluctantly. And then, suddenly, a dreadful possibility flashed through my mind. I hoped and prayed it would not occur to John also. I glanced sideways at him. He was frowning perplexedly, and I drew a deep breath of relief, for the terrible thought that had flashed across my mind was this, that Dr. Bauerstein might have had an accomplice. Yet surely it could not be. Surely no woman as beautiful as Mary Cavendish could be a murderess. Yet even beautiful women had been known to poison. So because Hastings has a crush on Mary Cavendish, she can't be a murderess, but because she's not crushing on him, she could be. Yeah, no issues there, Mr. Hastings. And suddenly I remembered that the first conversation at tea on the day of my arrival, and the gleam in her eyes as she had said that poison was a woman's weapon. How agitated she had been on that fateful Tuesday evening. Had Mrs. Inglethorpe discovered something between her and Bauerstein, and threatened to tell her husband? Was it to stop that denunciation that the crime had been committed? Then I remembered that enigmatical conversation between Poirot and Evelyn Howard. Was this what they had meant? Was this the monstrous possibility that Evelyn had tried not to believe? Yes, it all fitted in. No wonder Miss Howard had suggested hushing it up. And now I understood that unfinished sentence of hers. Emily herself. And in my heart I agreed with her. Would not Mrs. Inglethorpe have preferred to go unavenged rather than have such terrible dishonor fall upon the name of Cavendish? There's another thing, said John suddenly, and the unexpected sound of his voice made me start guiltily. Something which makes me doubt if what you say can be true. What's that? I asked, thankful that he had gone away from the subject of how the poison could have been introduced into the cocoa. Why, the fact that Bauerstein demanded a post-mortem. He needn't have done so. Little Wilkins would have been quite content to let it go at heart disease. Yes, I said doubtfully, but we don't know. Perhaps he thought it safer in the long run. Someone might have talked afterwards. Then the Home Office might have ordered exhumation. The whole thing would have come out then, and he would have been in an awkward position, for no one would have believed that a man of his reputation could have been deceived into calling it heart disease. Yes, that's possible, admitted John. Still, he added, I'm blessed if I can see what his motive could have been. I trembled. Hey, it's the guy trembling this time. Look here, I said. I may be altogether wrong. And remember, all this is in confidence. Oh, of course, that goes without saying. We had walked as we talked, and now we passed through the little gate into the garden. Voices rose near at hand, for tea was spread out under the sycamore tree, as it had been on the day of my arrival. Cynthia was back from the hospital, and I placed my chair beside her, and I told her of Poirot's wish to visit the dispensary. Of course, I'd love him to see it. He'd better come to tea there one day. I must fix it up with him. He's such a dear little man, but he is funny. He made me take the brooch out of my tie the other day and put it in again, because he said it wasn't straight. I laughed. It's quite a mania with him. Yes, isn't it? We were silent for a minute or two, and then, glancing in the direction of Mary Cavendish and dropping her voice, Cynthia said, Mr. Hastings. Yes? After tea, I want to talk to you. Her glance at Mary had set me thinking. I fancied that between these two there existed very little sympathy. For the first time, it occurred to me to wonder about the girl's future. Mrs. Inglethorpe had made no provisions of any kind for her, but I imagined that John and Mary would probably insist on making her home with them, at any rate until the end of the war. John, I knew, was very fond of her, and would be sorry to let her go. John, who had gone into the house, now reappeared. His good-natured face wore an unaccustomed frown of anger. "Confound those detectives! I can't think what they're after. They've been in every room in the house, turning things inside out and upside down. It really is too bad. I suppose they took advantage of our all being out. I shall go for that fellow Jop when I next see him." "A lot of Paul Pry's," granted Miss Howard. Lawrence opined that they had to make a show of doing something. Mary Cavendish said nothing. After tea, I invited Cynthia to come for a walk, and we sauntered off into the woods together. "Well?" I inquired, as soon as we were protected from prying eyes by the leafy screen. With a sigh, Cynthia flung herself down and tossed off her hat. The sunlight, piercing through the branches, turned the auburn of her hair to quivering gold. "Mr. Hastings, you're always so kind, and you know such a lot." It struck me at this moment that Cynthia was really a very charming girl, much more charming than Mary, who never said things of that kind. "Well," I asked benignly, as she hesitated, "I want to ask your advice. What shall I do?" "Do?" "Yes. You see, Aunt Emily always told me I should be provided for. I suppose she forgot, or didn't think she was likely to die. Anyway, I am not provided for, and I don't know what to do. Do you think I ought to go away from here at once?" "Good heavens, no. They don't want to part with you, I'm sure." Cynthia hesitated a moment, plucking up the grass with her tiny hands. Then she said, "Mrs. Cavendish does. She hates me." Oh, he was always crushing on Cynthia and Mary. He's just thinking he prefers her because she seems to be responding to him. He thinks maybe she's flirting. Dude's just going to go for anything that smiles his way, I think. "Hates you?" I cried, astonished. Cynthia nodded. "Yes, I don't know why, but she can't bear me, and he can't either." "There, I know you're wrong," I said warmly. "On the contrary, John is very fond of you." "Oh, yes, John. I meant Lawrence. Not, of course, that I care whether Lawrence hates me or not. Still, it's rather horrid when no one loves you, isn't it?" It's so fucking true, Random. "But they do, Cynthia dear," I said earnestly. "I'm sure you are mistaken. Look, there's John and Miss Howard." Cynthia nodded rather gloomily. "Yes, John likes me, I think, and of course Evie, for all her gruff ways, wouldn't be unkind to a fly. But Lawrence never speaks to me if he can help it, and Mary can hardly bring herself to be civil to me. She wants Evie to stay on, is begging her to, but she doesn't want me, and I don't know what to do." Suddenly the poor child burst out crying. Okay. Sorry, I glanced ahead. That was a mistake. "I don't know what possessed me. Her beauty, perhaps, as she sat there, with the sunlight glinting down on her head. Perhaps the sense of relief at encountering someone who so obviously could have no connection with the tragedy. Perhaps honest pity for her youth and loneliness. Anyway, I leant forward and, taking her little hand, I said awkwardly, 'Marry me, Cynthia.'" Yeah, that's what caused me to choke and laugh. Unwittingly, I had hit upon a sovereign remedy for her tears. She sat up at once, drew her hand away, and said, with some asperity, "Don't be silly." I was a little annoyed. "I'm not being silly. I'm asking you to do me the honor of becoming my wife." To my intense surprise, Cynthia burst out laughing and called me a funny dear. "It's perfectly sweet of you," she said, "but you know you don't want to." "Yes, I do. I've got—" "Never mind what you've got. You don't really want to, and I don't either. Well, of course, that settles it, I said stiffly. But I don't see anything to laugh at. There's nothing funny about a proposal. Oh, he is so offended. No, indeed, said Cynthia. Somebody might accept you next time. Goodbye. You've cheered me up very much. And with a final, uncontrollable burst of merriment, she vanished through the trees. Ouch. First Perot calls him an idiot, and then Cynthia laughs at him? Dude's dignity is, like, savaged. I mean, he kind of deserves it, but oof. At least his ego will fit through the door now. Thinking over the interview, it struck me as being profoundly unsatisfactory. It occurred to me suddenly that I would go down to the village and look up Bauerstein. Somebody ought to be keeping an eye on the fellow. At the same time, it would be wise to allay any suspicions he might have as to his being suspected. I remembered how Perot had relied on my diplomacy. Accordingly, I went to the little house with the apartments card inserted in the window, where I knew he lodged, and tapped on the door. An old woman came and opened it. Good afternoon, I said pleasantly. Is Dr. Bauerstein in? She stared at me. Haven't you heard? Heard what? About him. What about him? He's took. Took? Dead? No, took by the police. By the police, I gasped. Do you mean they've arrested him? Yes, that's it, and... I waited to hear no more, but tore up the village to find Perot. Let's see. All right, we may not finish the next chapter, but we've got 30 minutes left, so I do think we'll go ahead and start it, and we'll just see where we get. Sound good to everybody? All right. So, Chapter 10. The Arrest. Thanks, Random. To my extreme annoyance, Perot was not in, and the old Belgian who answered my knock informed me that he believed he had gone to London. I was dumbfounded. What on earth could Perot be doing in London? Was it a sudden decision on his part, or had he already made up his mind when he parted from me a few hours earlier? I retraced my steps to Styles in some annoyance. With Perot away, I was uncertain how to act. Had he foreseen this arrest? Had he not, in all probability, been the cause of it? Those questions I could not resolve. But in the meantime, what was I to do? Should I announce the arrest openly at Styles, or not? Though I did not acknowledge it to myself, the thought of Mary Cavendish was weighing on me. Would it not be a terrible shock to her? For the moment, I set aside utterly any suspicions of her. She could not be implicated, otherwise I should have heard some hint of it. Of course, there was no possibility of being able to permanently conceal Dr. Bauerstein's arrest from her. It would be announced in every newspaper on the morrow. Still, I shrank from blurting it out. If only Perot had been accessible, I could have asked his advice. What possessed him to go posting off to London in this unaccountable way? In spite of myself, my opinion of his sagacity was immeasurably heightened. I would never have dreamt of suspecting the doctor, had not Perot put it into my head. Yes, decidedly the little man was clever. Well, I mean, he got shot down by Cynthia. But what's he going to do if Mary and Cynthia shoot him down? Dorcas? Evie? The cat. Poor cat. After some reflecting, I decided to take John into my confidence and leave him to make the matter public or not as he thought fit. He gave vent to a prodigious whistle as I imparted the news. Great Scott, you were right then. I couldn't believe it at the time. No, it is astonishing until you get used to the idea and see how it makes everything fit in. I will say, he ran off before he could hear what Dr. Bauerstein was arrested for. So, I mean, maybe he was faking prescriptions for opiates? I don't know. Now, what are we to do? Of course, it will be generally known tomorrow. John reflected. Never mind, he said at last. We won't say anything at present. There is no need. As you say, it will be known soon enough. But to my intense surprise, on getting down early the next morning and eagerly opening the newspapers, there was not a word about the arrest. Actually, did she even say that he was arrested or just took? Maybe for questioning? Well, that's not very clear. There was a column of mere padding about the Styles poisoning case, but nothing further. It was rather inexplicable, but I suppose that, for some reason or other, Jop wanted to keep it out of the papers. It worried me just a little, for it suggested the possibility there might be further arrests to come. After breakfast, I decided to go down to the village and see if Perrault had returned yet. But before I could start, a well-known face blocked one of the windows, and the well-known voice said, "Bonjour, mon ami." "Perrault," I exclaimed with relief, and seizing him by both hands, I dragged him into the room. I was never so glad to see anyone. Listen, I have said nothing to anybody but John. Is that right? "My friends," replied Perrault, "I do not know what you are talking about." "Dr. Bauerstein's arrest, of course," I answered impatiently. "Is Bauerstein arrested, then?" "Did you not know it?" "Not the least in the world." But pausing a moment, he added, "Still, it does not surprise me. After all, we are only 4 miles from the coast." "The coast?" I asked, puzzled. "What has that got to do with it?" Perrault shrugged his shoulders. "Surely it is obvious." "Not to me. No doubt I am very dense, but I cannot see what the proximity of the coast has got to do with the murder of Mrs. Inglethorpe." "Nothing at all, of course," replied Perrault, smiling. "But we were speaking of the arrest of Dr. Bauerstein." "Well, he is arrested for the murder of Mrs. Inglethorpe." "What?" cried Perrault in apparently lively astonishment. "Dr. Bauerstein arrested for the murder of Mrs. Inglethorpe?" "Yes." "Impossible. That would be too good a farce. Who told you that, my friend?" "Well, no one exactly told me," I confessed, "but he is arrested." "Oh, yes, very likely. But for espionage, mon ami." "Espionage?" I gasped. "Precisely." "Not for poisoning Mrs. Inglethorpe?" "Not unless our friend Jop has taken leave of his senses," replied Perrault placidly. But I thought you thought so too." Perrault gave me one look, which conveyed a wondering pity, and his full sense of the utter absurdity of such an idea. "Do you mean to say," I asked, slowly adapting myself to the new idea, "that Dr. Bauerstein is a spy?" Perrault nodded. "Have you never suspected it?" "It never entered my head." "It did not strike you as peculiar that a famous London doctor should bury himself in a little village like this, and should be in the habit of walking about at all hours of the night fully dressed?" "No," I confessed. "I never thought of such a thing." "He is, of course, a German by birth," said Perrault thoughtfully, "though he has practiced so long in this country that nobody thinks of him as anything but an Englishman. He was naturalized about 15 years ago. A very clever man. A Jew, of course." "The blackguard!" I cried indignantly. "Not at all. He is, on the contrary, a patriot. Think what he stands to lose. I admire the man myself." But I could not look at it in Perrault's philosophical way. "And this is the man with whom Mary Cavendish has been wandering about all over the country?" I cried indignantly. "Yes. I should fancy he found her very useful," remarked Perrault. "So long as gossip busied itself in coupling their names together, any other vagaries of the doctor's past unobserved. Then you think he never really cared for her? I asked eagerly. Rather too eagerly, perhaps, under the circumstances. So he finds out dude was a spy, and all he cares is that, maybe he can get with Mary, his buddy's friend, or his buddy's wife. Dude, I am losing more and more respect for Mr. Hastings. That, of course, I cannot say, but shall I tell you my own private opinion, Hastings? Yes. Well, it is this, that Mrs. Cavendish does not care, and never has cared one little jot about Dr. Bowerstein. Do you really think so? I could not disguise my pleasure. I am quite sure of it, and I will tell you why. Yes, because she cares for someone else, mon ami. Oh, what did he mean? In spite of myself, an agreeable warmth spread over me. I am not a vain man where women are concerned, but I remembered certain evidences, too lightly thought of at the time, perhaps, but which certainly seemed to indicate. My pleasing thoughts were interrupted by the sudden entrance of Miss Howard. She glanced round hastily to make sure there was no one else in the room, and quickly produced an old sheet of brown paper. This she handed to Perrault, murmuring as she did so the cryptic words, "on top of the wardrobe." Then she hurriedly left the room. Perrault unfolded the sheet of paper eagerly and uttered an exclamation of satisfaction. He spread it out on the table. Yeah, it didn't even prompt me to moderate that, probably because you're a moderator. Tisk tisk. Shame, shame, Vella. He spread it out on the table. Come here, Hastings. Now tell me, what is that initial? J or L? It was a medium-sized sheet of paper, rather dusty, as though it had lain by for some time. But it was the label that was attracting Perrault's attention. At the top, it bore the printed stamp of Messrs. Parksons, the well-known theatrical costumers, and it was addressed to the debatable initial Cavendish, Esquire, Styles Court, Styles, St. Mary, Essex. It might be T or it might be L, I said, after studying the thing for a minute or two. It certainly isn't a J. Good, replied Perrault, folding up the paper again. I also am of your way of thinking. It is an L. Depend upon it. Where did it come from? I asked curiously. Is it important? Moderately so. It confirms a surmise of mine. Having deduced its existence, I sent Miss Howard to search for it, and as you see, she has been successful. What did she mean by on top of the wardrobe? She meant, replied Perrault promptly, that she found it on top of a wardrobe. A funny place for a piece of brown paper, I mused. Not at all. The top of a wardrobe is an excellent place for brown paper and cardboard boxes. I have kept them there myself. Neatly arranged, there is nothing to offend the eye. Perrault, I asked earnestly, have you made up your mind about this crime? Yes. That is to say, I believe I know how it was committed. Ah. Unfortunately, I have no proof beyond my surmise, unless... With sudden energy, he caught me by the arm and whirled me down the hall, calling out in French in his excitement, Mademoiselle Dorcas! Mademoiselle Dorcas, un moment, s'il vous plaît. Dorcas, quite flurried by the noise, came hurrying out of the pantry. My good Dorcas, I have an idea, a little idea. If it should prove justified, what magnificent chance! Tell me, on Monday, not Tuesday, Dorcas, but Monday, the day before the tragedy, did anything go wrong with Mrs. Inglethorpe's bell? Dorcas looked very surprised. Yes, sir. Now you mention it, it did, although I don't know how you came to hear of it. A mouse or some such must have nibbled the wire through. The man came and put it right on Tuesday morning. With a long, drawn-out exclamation of ecstasy, Perrault led the way back to the morning room. See you, one should not ask for outside proof. No. Reason should be enough. But the flesh is weak. It is consolation to find that one is on the right track. Ah, my friend, I am like a giant refreshed. I run, I leap. And in very truth, run and leap he did, gamboling wildly down the stretch of lawn outside the long window. "What is your remarkable little friend doing?" asked a voice behind me, and I turned to find Mary Cavendish at my elbow. She smiled, and so did I. "What is it all about?" Uh-oh. She smiled at him. Desire confirmed. "Really, I can't tell you." He asked Dorcas some question about a bell, and appeared so delighted with her answer that he is capering about, as you see. Mary laughed. "How ridiculous. He's going out of the gate. Isn't he coming back today?" "I don't know. I've given up trying to guess what he'll do next." "Is he quite mad, Mr. Hastings?" "I honestly don't know. Sometimes I feel sure he is mad as a hatter, and then, just as he is at his maddest, I find there is method to his madness." "I see." In spite of her laugh, Mary was looking thoughtful this morning. She seemed grave, almost sad. It occurred to me that it would be a good opportunity to tackle her on the subject of Cynthia. I began rather tactfully, I thought, but I had not gone far before she stopped me authoritatively. "You are an excellent advocate, I have no doubt, Mr. Hastings, but in this case your talents are quite thrown away. Cynthia will run no risk of encountering any unkindness from me." I began to stammer feebly that I hoped she hadn't thought, but again she stopped me, and her words were so unexpected that they quite drove Cynthia and her troubles out of my mind. "Mr. Hastings," she said, "do you think I and my husband are happy together?" I was considerably taken aback, and murmured something about its not being my business to think anything of the sort. "Well," she said quietly, "whether it is your business or not, I will tell you that we are not happy." I said nothing, for I saw that she had not finished. She began slowly, walking up and down the room, her head a little bent, and that slim, supple figure of hers swaying gently as she walked. She stopped suddenly and looked up at me. "You don't know anything about me, do you?" she asked. "Where I come from, who I was before I married John? Anything, in fact. Well, I will tell you. I will make a father confessor of you. You are kind, I think. Yes, I am sure that you are kind." Somehow, I was not quite as elated as I might have been. I remembered that Cynthia had begun her confidences in much the same way. Besides, a father confessor should be elderly. It is not at all the role for a young man. "My father was English," said Mrs. Cavendish, "but my mother was a Russian." "Ah," I said, "now I understand." "Understand what?" "A hint of something foreign, different, that there has always been about you." "My mother was very beautiful, I believe. I don't know, because I never saw her. She died when I was quite a little child. I believe there was some tragedy connected with her death. She took an overdose of some sleeping draught by mistake. However that may be, my father was broken-hearted. Shortly afterwards, he went into the consular service. Everywhere he went, I went with him. When I was 23, I had been nearly all over the world. It was a splendid life. I loved it." There was a smile on her face, and her head was thrown back. She seemed living in the memory of those old, glad days. "Then my father died. He left me very badly off. I had to go and live with some old aunts in Yorkshire." She shuddered. "You will understand me when I say that it was a deadly life for a girl brought up as I had been. The narrowness, the deadly monotony of it almost drove me mad." She paused a minute and added in a different tone, "And then I met John Cavendish." "Yes. You can imagine that, from my aunt's point of view, it was a very good match for me. But I can honestly say that it was not this fact which weighed with me. No, he was simply a way of escape from the insufferable monotony of my life." I said nothing, and after a moment she went on. "Don't misunderstand me. I was quite honest with him. I told him, what was true, that I liked him very much, and that I hoped to come to like him more, but that I was not in any way what the world calls in love with him. He declared that that satisfied him, and so we were married." She waited a long time. A little frown had gathered on her forehead. She seemed to be looking back earnestly into those past days. I am sure, he cared for me at first, but I suppose we were not well matched. Almost at once we drifted apart. It is not a pleasing thing for my pride, but it is the truth, tired of me very soon. I must have made some murmur of dissent, for she went on quickly. Oh, yes, he did. Not that it matters now that we've come to the parting of the ways. What do you mean? She answered quietly. I mean that I am not going to remain at Styles. You and John are not going to live here? John may live here, but I shall not. You're going to leave him? Yes. But why? She paused a long time and said at last, Perhaps because I want to be free. And as she spoke, I had a sudden vision of broad spaces, virgin tracts of forest and untrodden lands, and a realization of what freedom would mean to such a nature as Mary Cavendish. I seemed to see her for a moment as she was, a proud, wild creature, as untamed by civilization as some shy bird of the hills. A little cry broke from her lips. You don't know how this hateful place has been prison to me. I understand, I said, but don't do anything rash. Oh, rash. Her voice mocked at my prudence. Then suddenly, I said a thing I could have bitten out my tongue for. You know that Dr. Bauerstein has been arrested. An instant coldness passed like a mask over her face, blotting out all expression. John was so kind as to break that to me this morning. Well, what do you think? I asked feebly. Of what? Of the arrest. What should I think? Apparently he is a German spy, so the gardener had told John. Her face and voice were absolutely cold and expressionless. Did she care, or did she not? She moved away a step or two and fingered one of the flower vases. They are quite dead. I must do them again. Would you mind moving? Thank you, Mr. Hastings. And she walked quietly past me out of the window, with a cool little nod of dismissal. No, surely she could not care for Bauerstein. No woman could act her part with that icy unconcern. Poirot did not make his appearance the following morning, and there was no sign of the Scotland Yard men. But at lunchtime there arrived a new piece of evidence, or rather lack of evidence. We had vainly tried to trace the fourth letter, which Mrs. Inglethorpe had written on the evening preceding her death. Our efforts had been in vain. We had abandoned the matter, hoping that it might turn up of itself one day. And this is just what did happen, in the shape of a communication which arrived by the second post from a firm of French music publishers, acknowledging Mrs. Inglethorpe's check and regretting they had been unable to trace a certain series of Russian folk songs. So the last hope of solving the mystery, by means of Mrs. Inglethorpe's correspondence on the fatal evening, had to be abandoned. Just before tea, I strolled down to tell Poirot of the new disappointment, but found, to my annoyance, that he was gone once more. Gone to London again? Oh, no, monsieur. He has but taken the train to Tadminster, to see a young ladies' dispensary, he said. Silly ass, I ejaculated. I told him Wednesday that was the one day she wasn't there. Well, tell him to look us up tomorrow morning, will you? Certainly, monsieur. But on the following day, no sign of Poirot. I was getting angry. He was really treating us in the most cavalier fashion. After lunch, Lawrence drew me aside and asked me if I was going down to see him. No, I don't think I shall. He can come up here if he wants to see us. Oh. Lawrence looked indeterminate. Something unusually nervous and excited in his manner roused my curiosity. What is it? I asked. I could go if there's anything special. It's nothing much, but, well, if you are going, will you tell him? He dropped his voice to a whisper. I think I found the extra coffee cup. I had almost forgotten that enigmatical message of Poirot's, but now my curiosity was aroused afresh. Lawrence would say no more, so I decided that I would descend from my high horse and once more seek out Poirot at Leastways Cottage. This time I was received with a smile, Monsieur Perrault was within. Would I mount? I mounted accordingly. Perrault was sitting by the table, his head buried in his hands. He sprang up at my entrance. What is it? I asked solicitously. You're not ill, I trust. No, not ill, but I decide an affair of great moment. Whether to catch the criminal or not, I asked facetiously. But to my great surprise, Perrault nodded gravely. To speak or not to speak, as your so great Shakespeare says, that is the question. I did not trouble to correct the quotation. You are not serious, Perrault. I am of the most serious, for the most serious of all things hangs in the balance. And that is? A woman's happiness, mon ami, he said gravely. I did not quite know what to say. The moment has come, said Perrault thoughtfully, and I do not know what to do. For see you, it is a big stake for which I play. No one but I, Hercule Poirot, would attempt it, and he tapped himself proudly on the breast. After pausing a few minutes respectfully, so as not to spoil his effect, I gave him Lawrence's message. Aha! He cried. So he has found the extra coffee cup. That is good. He has more intelligence than would appear, this long-faced Monsieur Lawrence of yours. I did not myself think very highly of Lawrence's intelligence, but I forbore to contradict Perrault, and gently took him to task for forgetting my instructions as to which were Cynthia's days off. It is true, I have the head of a sieve. However, the other young lady was most kind. She was sorry for my disappointment, and showed me everything in the kindest way. Oh, well, that's all right then, and you must go to tea with Cynthia another day. I told him about the letter. I'm sorry for that, he said. I always had hopes of that letter. But no, it was not to be. This affair must all be unraveled from within. He tapped his forehead. These little gray cells, it is up to them, as you say over here. Then suddenly he asked, Are you a judge of finger marks, my friend? No, I said, rather surprised. I know that there are no two finger marks alike, but that's as far as my science goes. Exactly. He unlocked a little drawer and took out some photographs which he laid on the table. I have numbered them 1, 2, and 3. Will you describe them to me? I studied the proofs attentively. All greatly magnified, I see. Number 1, I should say, are a man's fingerprints, thumb and first finger. Number 2 are a lady's. They are much smaller and quite different in every way. Number 3, I paused for some time. There seemed to be a lot of confused finger marks, but here, very distinctly, are number 1s. Overlapping the others? Yes. Do you recognize them beyond fail? Oh, yes, they are identical. Perrault nodded, and gently taking the photographs from me, locked them up again. I suppose, I said, that as unusual you are not going to explain. On the contrary, number 1 were the fingerprints of Monsieur Lawrence. Number 2 were those of Mademoiselle Cynthia. They are not important. I merely obtained them for comparison. Number 3 is a little more complicated. Yes? It is, as you see, highly magnified. You may have noticed a sort of blur extending all across the picture. I will not describe to you the special apparatus, dusting powder, etc., which I used. It is a well-known process to the police, and by means of it you can obtain a photograph of the fingerprints of any object in a very short space of time. Well, my friend, you have seen the finger marks. It remains to tell you the particular object upon which they had been left. Go on. I'm really excited. Eh bien. Photo number 3 represents the highly magnified surface of a tiny bottle in the top poison cupboard of the dispensary in the Red Cross Hospital at Tadminster, which sounds like the house that Jack built. Good heavens, I exclaimed. But what were Lawrence Cavendish's finger marks doing on it? He never went near the poison cupboard the day we were there. Oh, yes, he did. Impossible. We were together the whole time. Perrault shook his head. No, my friend. There was a moment when you were not all together. There was a moment when you could not have been all together, or it would not have been necessary to call to Monsieur Lawrence to come and join you on the balcony. I'd forgotten that, I admitted. But it was only for a moment. Long enough. Long enough for what? Perrault's smile became rather enigmatical. long enough for a gentleman who has once studied medicine to gratify a very natural interest and curiosity. Our eyes met. Barreau's were pleasantly vague. He got up and hummed a little tune. I watched him suspiciously. Barreau, I said, what was in this particular little bottle? Barreau looked out of the window. Hydrochloride of strychnine, he said, over his shoulder, continuing to hum. Good heavens! I said it quite quietly. I was not surprised. I had expected that answer. They use the pure hydrochloride of strychnine for very little, only occasionally for pills. It is the official solution. Liquid strychnine hydrochlor that is used in most medicines. That is why the finger marks have remained undisturbed since then. How did you manage to take this photograph? I dropped my hat from the balcony, explained Perrault simply. Visitors were not permitted below at that hour, so in spite of my many apologies, Mademoiselle Cynthia's colleague had to go down and fetch it for me. Then you knew what you were going to find? No, not at all. I merely realized that it was possible, from your story, for Monsieur Lawrence to go to the poison cupboard. The possibility had to be confirmed, or eliminated. Perrault, I said, your gaiety does not deceive me. This is a very important discovery. I do not know, said Perrault, but one thing does strike me. No doubt it has struck you too. What is that? Why, that there is altogether too much strychnine about this case. This is the third time we run up against it. There was strychnine in Mrs. Inglethorpe's tonic. There is the strychnine sold across the counter at Styles St. Mary by Mace. Now we have more strychnine, handled by one of the household. It is confusing, and as you know, I do not like confusion. Before I could reply, one of the other Belgians opened the door and stuck his head in. There's a lady below, asking for Mr. Hastings. A lady? I jumped up. Perrault followed me down the narrow stairs. Mary Cavendish was standing in the doorway. I have been visiting an old woman in the village, she explained, and as Lawrence told me you were with Monsieur Perrault, I thought I would call for you. Alas, madam, said Perrault, I thought you had come to honor me with a visit. I will some day, if you ask me, she promised him, smiling. That is well. If you should need a father confessor, madam, she started ever so slightly. Remember, Papa Perrault is always at your service. She stared at him for a few minutes, as though seeking to read some deeper meaning into his words. Then she turned abruptly away. Come, will you not walk back with us to Monsieur Perrault? Enchanted, madame. All the way to Styles, Mary talked fast and feverishly. It struck me that in some ways she was nervous of Perrault's eyes. The weather had broken, and the sharp wind was almost autumnal in its shrewishness. Mary shivered a little and buttoned her black sports coat closer. The wind through the trees made a mournful noise, like some great giant sighing. We walked up to the great door of Styles, and at once the knowledge came to us that something was wrong. Dorcas came running out to meet us. She was crying and wringing her hands. I was aware of other servants huddled together in the background, all eyes and ears. Oh, ma'am, I don't know how to tell you. What is it, Dorcas? I asked impatiently. Tell us at once. It's the wicked detectives. They've arrested him. They've arrested Mr. Cavendish. Arrested Lawrence? I gasped. I saw a strange look come into Dorcas's eyes. No, sir, not Mr. Lawrence. Mr. John. Behind me, with a wild cry, Mary Cavendish fell heavily against me, and as I turned to catch her, I met the quiet triumph in Perrault's eyes. And that is the end of the chapter. So I think we'll conclude there. If you haven't voted yet, why don't you record your votes and say who you think it might be real quick. And we'll see what the poll says for today. If it's taking votes still. Here, I'll close and reopen it. There we go. Now it should respond. There we go. Okay. I reset it every stream, so you'll get to vote it again during the next reading. But right now it looks like it's a split between John and Lawrence Cavendish. I will have to ask Megster how to make more of the poll display on the screen. I'm not sure why it's doing that. I'm still learning all this, guys, so please, I do appreciate your patience with me on it. It is all entirely out of my experience before I started doing this. I didn't even have a Twitch account, didn't watch people on Twitch, nothing. Certainly hadn't messed with any streaming software. No patience? Man, that's harsh. Why you gotta be so harsh? Alright. Well, you guys want to watch some Dead by Daylight? Or should I look for like a new random person to raid? After that, I think I might work on the Discord, try and get it up for everybody. When I do open the Discord, I will put a link on my profile in Twitch, and I'll see about adding another link to the stream, so you'll be able to join it from there. And we'll have a role selection bot, so you can select a role, and then, yay, you'll be in the Discord. The rules are posted up. It is a community server. Among other things, that means we need to be sure to not do any not safe for work stuff there. That's a mandatory rule from Discord for community servers, although to be honest, I was going to make that rule anyway, because this is more about books and stories and stuff. Of course, if it's something within the story that we're reading, that's, you know, fair play, obviously. Yeah. Moderator's the one using the worst language in the stream. Shame, shame, shame. But other than that, pretty basic stuff. First rule would be, you know, be decent to each other. I don't think that should be a problem for anybody, though. All right. Does anybody else want to vote? Should I make a poll for, you know, do you think Hastings is a creeper? Just a yes, no. Well, I mean, creeper, desperate. Desperation can make you seem kind of creepy. I will say I'm not impressed with the guy. He's very fickle. Believable character. I'll absolutely grant that. He's a very believable character, although a bit of a caricature. So, I am looking at the next round of books, and some of the books that have been suggested were The Count of Monte Cristo by Dumas, um, Poe, of course, although I've already committed to reading some Poe on Friday. Um, there was Sherlock Holmes. We could look at the next Agatha Christie Poirot novel. Let me see what some of the others were real quick. Dead Souls by Nikolai Gogol, which is one of the great Russian novels. So that's a possibility as well. Of course, I'd read it in English for all of you. So, don't worry there. I won't make you learn Russian. Any of those strike anybody's fancy? Sherlock Holmes, Count of Monte Cristo, Dead Souls by Nikolai Gogol, which is one of the great Russian novels in English. Poe, of course. More Agatha Christie for some more Poirot novels. I mean, it's been kind of fun. I've really enjoyed going back and forth and talking to a few people on who I think the killer is. So that's been a lot of fun. Honestly, I think it's easier to do that kind of discussion and debate with Agatha Christie than Arthur Conan Doyle. So if I was to choose like a detective novel to read, that kind of thing, a mystery, I'd probably go with Agatha Christie over Conan Doyle, although I really do like Sherlock Holmes. But let's go ahead and do the raid and close out the stream. And yeah, thank you everyone for coming today. I really appreciate it. And if you enjoyed the stream, enjoyed the story, please do click that follow button. It's a huge show of support and it's very appreciated. The older streams are starting to be deleted from Twitch, but don't worry, they are available on YouTube, and the link is on my Twitch page. So you'll be able to access those there if you want to go back and re-listen to a story or catch a part that you missed. So those will be available. At some point, I'll probably go back and do an editing pass over them. But right now, they're just raw recordings of the Twitch streams. And I upload those after every session. So if you want to revisit this one as well, it'll be there sometime today, sometime in the next 12 hours, I should say, depending on how long processing takes between Twitch and YouTube and that kind of thing. Usually takes a little bit of time. But let's go raid Alex. Partly because I'm tired and I'm a little too lazy to go looking for somebody new. And partly because he's been supportive and he's been fun to play Among Us with. So. Almost bedtime. I've got things I got to do before I go to sleep. But yes, obviously bedtime. All right, here goes the raid. And raiding.